Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone here to the UAF Summer Sessions and Lifelong Learning's Discover Alaska Lecture. My name is Kathy Alton, and I'm part of the organization for educators. And we will be introducing the Discover Alaska speakers every week. At UAF, we acknowledge the Alaska Native Nations upon whose ancestral lands our campus reside. In Fairbanks, our Trothieta campus is located on the ancestral lands of the Diné people of the lower Tanana River. Tonight, we will hear from Eugénie Euskirchen, Associate Professor at UAF, and Dr. Mahmooda Sultana, who is with NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, joining us via the internet. Dr. Eugénie Euskirchen is currently an associate professor at the Institute of the Arctic Biology in the Department of Biology and Wildlife. Her research focuses on climate feedback, Arctic and boreal ecosystems in those ecosystems. She completed her BS and her MS in mathematics. However, her PhD is in forest science. She's been at UAF since January 2004. Dr. Mahmooda Sultana is an instrument scientist at the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. She earned her BS and her PhD in chemical engineering. Dr. Sultana has developed advanced semiconductor devices, including X-ray detectors, microelectromechanical systems, and the micro-shutter array for the James Webb Space Telescope. For her outstanding work, she has received many awards, including the 2023 Goddard Science Directorate Mentoring Award. Without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Professor Euskirchen. I'm sorry.
No, thank you. That was great. Thank you. Thank you for coming this evening. So yeah, I'm Eugénie Euskirchen, and I'm going to be talking today about some work that we've been doing in the the boreal peatlands. There, can you hear me better now? Yeah, okay. And I'll be starting out with a little bit of background information in terms of why we care about peatlands and permafrost and why it's important in terms of the global carbon budget and climate change. And then after I'm done, I'll turn this over to Mahmooda, who will be talking about how her research is interacting with our research in terms of designing new instruments to help us make better measurements and then extending our measurements or her instrumentation onto Mars. So going back 800,000 years, this is the time series of carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere, so based on ice core records. And you can see that it was about 300 to 400,000 years ago where we had the largest increase in atmospheric CO2, and that was about 300 ppm. And that was the largest until our modern day record, and that's what you see over there in the magenta, and that looks like it just popped up all of a sudden. But that record is actually a period of about 60 years. And so it wasn't just this instantaneous pop-up, but if you compare it over to the 800,000 years, it actually looks that way. So here we are in 2024, where we've actually have a CO2 concentration of about 421 ppm, so even an increase since 2022. And so this has actually caused a large amount of warming in the atmosphere due to the greenhouse effect. And so about a 1.1 degrees C Celsius warming since pre-industrial times. And you can see most of this warming is actually at the upper latitudes, in the high latitudes. That's the dark red at the top of the map there. And so if we want to keep our are warming to about 1.5 degrees to 2 degrees Celsius based on the Paris Agreement, the large international treaty that is in force right now to keep temperatures at a level where we won't see as much harm as we would if things go above 2 degrees Celsius. We don't really have much wiggle room here. If we're already at 1.1 degrees Celsius, and it's actually a rate of warming of about 0.2 degrees C per decade, it's not going to take us very long to get to 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Celsius. So we have a bit of work to do here. And so what does the global carbon budget look like? This is a schematic of the land and the atmosphere and the ocean in terms of the global carbon budget. And so you can see here on this graph that we have in the land sector we have a sink of CO2. So more carbon is going into the land than is coming out. So the vegetation takes up carbon in terms of photosynthesis, but there's some that comes back out in terms of respiration and wildfire. But overall, we have a net sink of carbon dioxide in the land. A lot of this is due to the permafrost. So the permafrost, you can see here, has 1,700 gigatons of carbon in the soils. So it's a lot of carbon is in the permafrost. The atmosphere is actually a source. So there's more going into the atmosphere than is going down. And this is due to land use change, so clearing for agricultural areas, and then also due to energy use and to cement production as well. When we create cement, we burn a lot of limestone, and that emits a lot of CO2. So cement production is a pretty large source of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And then the ocean is a huge sink of carbon. It can take up a lot of carbon dioxide, particularly in the very deep part of the ocean. And so this is what our carbon budget looks like globally. Every year we go through and we make a carbon budget estimate. And you can see here, there's the fossil fuels and the industry, so that's about 34.4 gigatons of carbon dioxide. And we get that number from energy statistics and cement manufacturing information. And then there's about 5.7 gigatons carbon going into land use and land cover change. So like I said before, deforestation for agriculture and burning. And then over on the other side of the graph, we have the sinks. And so the atmosphere is holding carbon dioxide, about 28.6 gigatons of carbon per year. And then the land and the ocean, we estimate those based on large-scale global models and also observational data. And so when you add up the sources and the sinks on this graph here, on this schematic here, you can see that it looks as though we're actually in pretty good, we have a pretty good estimate. There's not much of an imbalance here. So our sources almost equal our sinks. There's just a 0.4% budget imbalance of about 0.2 petagram gigatons of carbon per year. And so that might look really good, but then you think about this budget imbalance, there's actually a lot of uncertainty around the budget imbalance. And so the black line here is our annual budget imbalance. So that 0.2 at the end of the time series there is what I was just showing you at the end on the last graph. But then that brown that surrounds that black line, that's our uncertainty. And you can see that there's a large amount of uncertainty in our carbon budget estimates. And so this is where permafrost starts to become important. But first of all, just to keep these numbers in mind, from 1850 to 2023, our emissions of carbon dioxide have been about 2,400 gigatons of carbon dioxide. And that means that if we want to stay within this aspirational limit of the Paris Treaty, we only have about 130 to 500 gigatons of carbon dioxide that we're allowed to emit if we don't want to warm the world more than 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius. And so that only gives us about 7 years to start really decreasing our carbon dioxide. If we go above that, then things are going to warm a lot more than we would like. So 130 to 500 gigatons of carbon dioxide is what we have left in our carbon budget. And so permafrost. Remember I said in the previous graph that we have about 1,700 billion tons of carbon in the organic matter of the permafrost soils. And this is accumulated over millennia. It doesn't just get there in a day. It takes many years to form. And so this amount is about the total amount that we've emitted in modern human times. So it's a lot of carbon. And how does it get released? So what we're seeing is that as temperatures warm, we have a deeper active layer. So the active layer is the part of the ground that freezes and thaws every year. And as temperatures warm, this active layer gets deep. So there's more permafrost thawing deeper into the ground each year. And that means that the soil microbes, the little organisms that live in the soil and like to munch up the organic matter, they actually like it when it's warmer and it's less frozen. They can eat more and they can decompose more and they can emit more carbon dioxide and methane. And the plants, they're still growing. They like the atmospheric CO2 increases, and so they grow a little bit more. But they're not necessarily keeping up with the microbes in the soil. And that's particularly true in the winter. So in the winter, of course, the plants can't photosynthesize. They're covered in snow. But the microbes can remain active. And so that gives them a leg up. And they can emit even more carbon dioxide and methane than they used to during the warmer winters. And so how do we estimate how much carbon dioxide and methane are coming out of the soil? So this is a modeling study that I did back in 2000, well, it was published in 2006. I probably did it in like 2004. And you can see here, 1990 to 2000 is what I considered our present day distribution of permafrost. So that pink map up there on the top left. And then in map B is the estimate of permafrost distribution from 2040 to 2050. And then if you take map B and you plop it onto map A, you can see that there are a few little pink dots poking out from around the edges there. And that's the area from which the permafrost is thawed. So there's not too much between 2040 and 2050. But then you take the map from 2090 to 2100 and you put that onto map A, and you can see that there are all sorts of little pink dots poking out from around the edges there. So there's a lot of permafrost that we estimate will thaw by 2100, and that is actually about 600 square kilometers of permafrost. So it's a lot of loss of frozen ground. And so that's all well and good, and we've been able to do this type of modeling since 2004. But that's the easy part. The hard part is, how do we estimate the amount of carbon dioxide and methane that is coming from that thawing permafrost? And so what is the magnitude, timing, and form of permafrost carbon release into the atmosphere in a warmer world? So our estimates, our modeling estimates of the amount of carbon that might be released from this thawing permafrost are really all over the map. They're from 22 gigatons of carbon to about 500 gigatons of carbon. And so that's a pretty wide range, right? Maybe we need to constrain that a little bit. And that is if we're just at these strategies for 1.5 degrees C warming. So if we have really strict mitigation, if we have less strict mitigation policies, if we're maybe up at that 2 degrees C or more warming, then we are up to 500 gigatons of carbon. And these estimates, they don't take into account things like, what if all the permafrost were to suddenly thaw all at once? What if we have some abrupt thaw? Or what if we have more fires, which we're already seeing? And we know when fires occur, they tend to thaw more permafrost, and that results in greater release of methane and carbon. And so our current policy, our current climate policy, it doesn't take this into account whatsoever. It does not take into account that we could potentially release up to 500 gigatons of carbon. And remember what I said, that we have about 130 to 500 gigatons of carbon that we're allowed to release from all sources combined in the next 7 years. But we could release that from just thawing permafrost alone, and we're not taking that into account whatsoever right now. And so why aren't we taking this into account, and what's been going on? And so part of the problem is that we haven't had a lot of measurements of permafrost thaw and carbon release that have been going through the long term. And so that's where some of my research has come in, and I'll just pivot to that. These are our sites. They're just south of Fairbanks in the Bonanza Creek Experimental Forest. They're in the lowland areas, the mosquito, swampy parts of the boreal forest. And so we have a black spruce site where there's what we thought initially was very cold soils and stable permafrost. We have 2 thermokarst bogs, and so in these thermokarst bogs, the permafrost has begun to thaw. One of the permafrost bogs, we think the permafrost began to thaw between 100 and 120 years ago, whereas in the other one, it's much older thaw. It was about 500 years ago as we started to come out of the Little Ice Age. And then we have a rich fen, and the rich fen is quite dynamic. Its hydrology is connected to the nearby Tanana River, and it doesn't actually have any near-surface permafrost. And this is the type of ecosystem that we expect to become more prevalent in the future. These bogs could easily turn into fens going forward. And it's already happening. So beginning in about 2010, we instrumented these sites with instruments that can measure carbon dioxide and methane emissions at a very fast rate over a long period of time. So we run our instruments 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And then we also take a number of meteorological and environmental measurements, and then we try to relate how our environmental and meteorological measurements can help us predict the carbon that's released from these various sites. And so you can see here there's a picture of the tower. We have our instruments up on these towers, and so that's the black spruce tower. That's one of the bogs. The fen, as I said, it's very dynamic. Sometimes you basically need a boat to get around in the fen. It can look like a little pond. And sometimes it dries out quite a bit more, like there I am walking around the boardwalk in the fen. And we don't have any line power at our sites, so we have everything powered with solar panels. Occasionally we need a little generator CPR in the winter, but in general we keep our instruments running during the winter. The scientific name for the measurements that we make are called eddy covariance measurements of net ecosystem exchange. And basically what we do is we have that instrument that has little claws on it. That's actually an anemometer, and it's measuring wind direction in all different, at a very fast rate in all different types of eddies. And then the other instrument there, the one that looks a little bit like it might make target practice, nice target practice there with the little ball on the top, that's a CO2 sensor. And so essentially we determine how many molecules go up in time 1 and come down in time 2. And then we calculate the vertical flux based on that information and the constituent of interest. So for example, carbon dioxide or methane. And so all this happens very quickly. We take these measurements at 10 times per second or 10 hertz. So we're constantly making these measurements of the wind and the CO2. And from that we can get a net flux. And this net flux is called net ecosystem exchange. And it's the difference between gross primary productivity, which is all the photosynthesis that's taking place in the ecosystem, minus the heterotrophic respiration. And so that's those little organisms that are munching the soil. That's the heterotrophic respiration. And then the autotrophic respiration. The plants, they actually respire too, and they give off CO2. So it's all the photosynthesis minus the soil microbes and the plant respiration. And this represents the net balance of CO2 in the ecosystem. And if the NEE is negative, then we say that CO2 is going into the surface. And if it's positive, then we say it's coming out. So during our time here at these sites, we have long-term records. And this is showing total precipitation and total snow water equivalent. You can see starting in 2014, some of you probably remember 2014, it was our really rainy summer. We had the most rain ever in a 100-year record that summer. It was pretty wet. And then 2016 actually wasn't too far behind. 2014, just a few millimeters less than 2016 actually. But every year since 2014, except for 2022, we've had above average rainfall. And the snow has actually increased as well. And that's the light blue there, the snow water equivalent. And we've also seen more snow in general since 2014. So there's the trend in snow water equivalent. And even though we've had more snow, we've actually seen a decrease in the snow season. And most of this is because the snow has been returning later in the fall. And that's what the third graph there is showing you, an increase in the a trend towards later snow return. The final graph there is showing the day of snow melt. And there's actually no trend in the day of snow melt during our record. And we've also seen some warming at these sites as well, particularly in the winter at the spruce and the fen. The soil temperatures there have been warming quite a bit. So remember I said that originally when we chose the spruce site, we said that soils were very cold and the permafrost was stable. Actually, the permafrost is not really stable there anymore, and it's not as cold as it used to be. And then the bog, it doesn't show a significant trend in the winter, but it does show significant warming in the fall. And both the bog and the fen have gotten quite a bit wetter. And so, for example, is the soil water component there of the bog, and you can see how the soil water in the bog has increased over time. And then we also see an increase in the active layer depth, so the part of the permafrost that freezes and thaws annually, and that's what this depth to permafrost is indicating here. And so this is various measurement sites around our measurement flux towers. And then this is showing you our cumulative net ecosystem exchange and our cumulative methane emissions at these sites. And so initially, for a long period of time, we've considered these sites in lowland boreal ecosystems to be net sinks of carbon dioxide. So we've always thought that they take up more carbon dioxide than they're giving out. But all four of these sites are actually showing that they're sources of carbon dioxide. So they're giving out more carbon dioxide than they're taking up. And we've always known these very wet sites produce a lot of methane, and that is what we're showing here, except for the black spruce site, which is a little drier and doesn't actually emit much methane. The fen, in particular, is emitting a lot of methane. And remember, I said that the fen is the type of ecosystem that we expect to see more of in the future. And it is the strongest, right now, source of carbon across all these sites. So when we think about carbon accounting and carbon credits, and maybe you've been hearing some of that in the news of sequestering carbon in the Alaska landscape. This isn't actually panning out here. We're actually, without doing anything at these sites, we're actually releasing carbon dioxide and methane. And then I did a little bit of back of the envelope scaling. And so what happens if we take our measurements and scale them out to all of interior Alaska, or just to the Tanana Flats? And so right now we consider our landscape to be about 40% fen, 7% bog, and 24% spruce, and then the rest is other stuff. And so that is kind of the current situation right now. And then I played around a little bit, and I said, well, what if we have 45% fen or 50% fen? And you can see those numbers go up right when we increase the fen percentage. If we drop the fen down to about 15%, then all of a sudden, it's not looking so bad, but that's not a very realistic scenario if we have more black spruce on the landscape. Black spruce is the one where we expect thaw, and are seeing thaw that could eventually all turn into fens. So essentially, if this stays the way it is, we're already emitting a lot of carbon. And so just to wrap up my part of the talk, we see a net release, and I didn't show you this, but it was actually positively correlated to the increases in precipitation as both rain and snow. So the more rain and snow we got, the more CO2 release that we found. And also this date of later snow return was also a positive factor on carbon dioxide and methane release. And this also emphasizes how much we need to have these long-term measurements. They're hard to maintain, and doing field work all winter long, it's not easy, but you have to capture that winter release, or you're not going to get the full picture. If you just go out for 1 year, you're not going to get the interannual variability. And you also have to go across different ecosystem types. So these ecosystems are all very close together. They're within a kilometer of one another down there in the lowland boreal forest, and there's a lot of heterogeneity, and we have to capture that in our measurements. And so finally, we need to maybe think about how we've thought of boreal forests being carbon sinks, particularly as we switch to an area where we have more fens and the permafrost continues to thaw. So with that, I will let Mahmooda talk about what she's doing at these sites and how that relates to Mars.
Thank you so much, Eugénie, for the background and putting this work in the right context. So I have a little bit of material on connecting to the talk Eugénie just gave, and then I'll talk about how it relates to planetary science. But first, I want to acknowledge the great team we have at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. We have had numerous student interns from various schools over the years, and of course our collaborators at different universities and funding sources. So as Eugénie mentioned, we have a large amount of carbon stored in permafrost, and about 1/4 of Earth's terrestrial surface is underlain by permafrost. In this map here, you can see the different types of permafrost, continuous, discontinuous, sporadic, and isolated in the northern hemisphere. Much of the permafrost in interior Alaska is just below the freezing point, making this large store of carbon potentially vulnerable to thaw. So we have about an estimated 1,700 petagrams of carbon, which is about 1 petagram equaling 1 billion metric tons. So that's a lot of carbon. To put it in context, this is equivalent to about 150 years of current fossil fuel emissions, which is about 10 gigatons per year. So this is a massive amount of carbon. As permafrost thaws, this carbon is then decomposed by microbes and released in the form of carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. With carbon dioxide, some of the carbon dioxide can get consumed by growing greeneries, but methane is significantly more potent as greenhouse gas, and the amount of methane does not necessarily decrease. So this here shows a schematic of this positive feedback that thawing permafrost can provide. So as permafrost melts and more carbon dioxide and methane gets released into the atmosphere, that in turn increases the temperature even further. The warmer climate and increased carbon dioxide can increase vegetation as well, which consumes some of the carbon dioxide, but it does not account for all of the carbon released into the atmosphere, resulting in a net increase. So this provides a positive feedback that's irreversible in human time scale. So the different types of permafrost sites we have in Alaska actually has different amount of carbon stored in them and different release rates due to different processes taking place. Eugénie talked about the three different sites that she has been studying. In this work, we are focusing on two of those sites, the bog site and the ridge fen site. One of the things we wanted to study here is the release rates and heterogeneity or variation of carbon across the site, because both the amount of carbon as well as the release rates affect the overall climate change. As Eugénie mentioned, she has been using eddy covariance techniques, these flux towers, to look at the methane concentration and carbon dioxide concentration. These are some of the pictures of flux towers in the winter and the summer. This is a very well established and reliable technique that has been used for more than a decade. However, it gives an average concentration over about 200-meter diameter, and is not able to capture some of the spatial variation and identify localized sources of carbon. And that's where one of the cutting edge instruments we have been developing at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center comes into play. So this is an instrument we have developed at Goddard. We call it multifunctional nanosensor platform. We're using a variety of cutting edge technologies to make this instrument. This is a highly compact and highly sensitive in situ gas sensing platform that uses a variety of nanomaterials. In a small instrument, we have about 10 independent gas sensing channels. We also have temperature sensors, heaters for temperature control, pressure sensors, and so on. With this small instrument, we can measure the local concentration of gases. Right now, we are targeting a few different gases, including hydrogen, ammonia, water, and methane, because these are some of the key gases needed for the origin of life. In a lot of planetary bodies, these are some of the key species we look for to assess habitability. However, this instrument can be customized for many other gases and volatiles. So last year, one of my team members and I were able to bring the instrument out to Fairbanks, Alaska, and we demonstrated its performance in one of the sites in Fairbanks. Here you can see the completely standalone instrument being operated at the fence site. We were able to measure small amounts of methane from the fence site. So these are some of the responses in the presence of samples taken from fence site. We were able to detect about 10 ppm methane, and we validated the results with lab measurements. So we collected samples and measured them afterwards using gas chromatography mass spectrometer, as well as Picaro, a heterodyne spectrometer. Both are well-established techniques for measuring methane and carbon dioxide. After showing that this instrument is working in the field, this year's campaign is actually a lot more ambitious. Now, I was supposed to give this talk in person because our campaign was supposed to take place this week. However, we are still working on getting permission for flying the drones. And so our campaign got pushed by 2 weeks. So in this summer's campaign, we are taking advantage of the small footprint of this instrument and integrating them with drones, small drones that can fly around the permafrost site and autonomously make measurements of methane and map out the concentration across the site, identify some of the localized sources, which flux towers currently cannot do. In addition, not only we are planning to fly a single drone, but we are planning to fly multiple drones that work in tandem in a cooperative way to make this map faster and in the most effective way possible, meaning with the least number of measurements possible. So we call this distributed mission architecture because we have a network of these instruments flying around. So this is a new and exciting capability for NASA and would be really useful for a variety of planetary science missions in the future. Here I have a picture of the instrument integrated to this custom-built drone. This picture was taken right before it took off, and I have a video here showing the drone with the instrument flying around in a pre-programmed sweeping pattern. Let me see if I can play this video. Please let me know if you can see the video. You can see the drone right here that's flying around in a pre-programmed pattern. Can you all see the video?
Yes.
Can you all see the video?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. And so this custom drone along with the instrument is working really well, and we're really excited to bring this to Alaska in about 2 weeks now. Hopefully we can use this to map out the permafrost sites. Now I want to switch gear and talk about how this relates to Mars and other planetary science targets. So methane is not only important as a greenhouse gas and for climate change, but it's also an important indicator of past or present life. It's an important biosignature. So we have been looking for methane in other planetary bodies over the years, and we found some methane plume on Mars from ground-based spectroscopy. Here, in this visualization, you can see some of the methane plumes. And then some of you might be aware that we sent a mass spectrometer on Curiosity rover to Mars that's roaming around Mars making measurements. So in the first few initial measurements, Curiosity did not find any methane. However, over the years, as it continued to look for methane, it found methane in some of the samples, in some of the measurements. And you can see some of the results here that initially we did not find any methane, but then in some of the measurements, there were small concentrations of methane found. But this became kind of inconsistent and confusing when with the trace gas orbiter, spacecraft orbiting around Mars, could not really detect any methane. So this gave rise to controversy around methane on Mars, whether the measurement Curiosity was making was real or not, whether it was due to contamination or was there something else going on. So methane is still a mystery on Mars. To make things more complicated, we found additional interesting trends where we showed that there is seasonal variation on Mars. So during summer, there is an increase in methane concentration, but then in winter, the concentration decreases. Not only that, there seems to be a daily variation of methane concentration. At nighttime, the concentration increases, and during the day, it decreases. This type of diurnal variation is more consistent with biological source rather than geochemical source. However, I'm not saying that this shows that there is life on Mars, but it does mean that there is something interesting going on that's causing this type of cycling. And right now there are lots of different types, lots of different hypotheses, but not a lot of measurements to prove one hypothesis versus another. So in this schematic from European Space Agency, you can see different pathways for methane being originated as well as coming out to the surface. It could be from biological source that's coming through cracks of permafrost subsurface, or it could be from geochemical sources, perhaps trapped in some form or other that's outgassing or coming out through volcanoes. There's also hypotheses about methane being produced in the atmosphere due to photochemical reactions. However, the fact that the orbiter did not detect any methane in the atmosphere, it was only found on the surface, means that and this hypothesis about methane being produced in the atmosphere may not necessarily be true. There's most likely some interesting thing happening that's releasing methane from into the surface layer here. So to address this methane mystery on Mars, we can leverage the capability we're developing and using in Alaska to map methane to understand what's happening on Mars. In the same way we plan to map methane in Alaska, we can put the instrument on a quadcopter we already have on Mars, or new quadcopters to go around and even look at areas that were inaccessible to the Curiosity rover and make measurements. So Curiosity was only able to measure methane at a specific location, Gale crater. But with this drone, we can make a lot more measurements in different areas, as well as over time. And not only that, we can detect some of the other species some of the other gases and volatiles simultaneously, that will help us narrow down some of the hypotheses. So this really would allow us to get new insights into what's happening. Not only on Mars, we can use this on the Moon to look for volatiles such as water vapor. We can look for resources for in situ resource utilization for our astronauts. We can look at volatiles in water deposits to try to understand where some of those water deposits came from, their origin. Also, we can identify targets for further investigation by, let's say, more sophisticated instrument like mass spectrometer, because the resources are very finite in our planetary body. We can only make so many measurements in a given period of time. So identifying a really important science target for measurement can significantly increase the science return. But not only for these applications, but we can use this technology, this capability for habitability assessment and search for life to explore our solar system essentially. There are many interesting targets within our solar system that potentially has oceans and other ingredients for life. So with this type of autonomous exploration capability, we will not only make point measurements, but look at many locations within the body. Excuse me, it's almost midnight here, so it's a little bit difficult. But yeah, so this is a new exciting capability we're demonstrating in Alaska, and we plan to take it beyond for other planetary science missions. With that, thank you so much for the opportunity to share this exciting work with you.